Welcome back to Markets Today. What are we discussing today? A couple of things, but the key conversation for the day, British America Tobacco full year financials that came out last week. Now, the dividend that you are getting is slightly lower than you got in the previous year. That's 33.5. Should you expect this to continue? Were this numbers expected? This is a conversation that we are going to be discussing with Miss Cynthia Wangari. She is an investment analyst covering this sector at Dyer and Blair Investment Bank. Welcome to the show, Cynthia.
Thank you very much.
Before we tackle the financials for British America Tobacco, we were just discussing the market previously. There's a lot of negative sentiment from a global standpoint. I mean, it's understandable because of coronavirus. But you speak to investors every other day. What is the sentiment when it comes to the NSE today?
So I think especially there's a big sellout on the foreign part.
Okay.
We are at the moment attributing it to the whole coronavirus outbreak, although we can't be certain that that's the cause.
Okay.
So our feeling is that investors are exiting because they want to go into safer currency. So it's kind of risk mitigation.
All right.
So we've been seeing a lot of sell-off. Which is contrary to what we had seen at the beginning of the year, where all of these stocks had started to pick.
Okay.
All of the banks had picked, Safaricom had picked. Now we're seeing KCB trade at 48.75.
That's true. 48 is a low number. Everybody thought it would go to 60.
Yeah, Safaricom is now at 28 point something, 28.8 thereabouts.
Yes.
So yeah, we're seeing a really big sell-off.
Okay.
So we think it's because investors are trying to fly to safety.
Okay.
And local investors are more or less price followers. So if foreign investors sell, locals will just follow.
So flight to quality, the dominant buyers on the bows, and the locals are just going to follow suit. So that means expect this. Is it more of a short-term correction, or do you think it's going to be longer term?
So I hope it's short term. I hope it can be maintained in due time.
Yes.
I hope that the markets will still react to results when they come around March, because I mean, everybody was expecting the banks to go to 60s at around that period. So I hope that's still the sentiment. I hope investors will still,
come back and look at the market. Yeah. But there could be some buying opportunities perhaps later on.
Sure. Even now, even now as the prices continue to dip.
Is there anything that whets your appetite as the prices are coming off?
I'm really looking forward to Safaricom going to 27.
We need to come to 27.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something that we will look out for.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Now, British America Tobacco, full year 19 numbers that were out last week. I know you did put out a note before the financials and after the financials. Did you expect the numbers that we saw?
So on a revenue standpoint, they actually did better than I expected.
Okay.
Gross revenue was up 9.1%. I had thought about 6.5.
You had okay.
Yeah. Net revenue was up 15%. I had thought 9.
Yes.
So from a revenue standpoint, they did really well, which was expected considering their performance at half year. So I think the only problem for this year, and what a lot of us hadn't seen, is the whole Solatium levy aspect.
Okay.
So,
and what is this levy?
So it's basically...
First, what's the name? What name did you pronounce earlier? Sorry, I didn't get that.
I hope the pronunciation is Solatium, but
okay, oh yes, Solatium. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So in the Tobacco Control Act, there was a requirement that tobacco producers contribute 2% of the value of their cigarettes sold to a fund that's meant to go into helping people recover from cigarette addictions, or go into research on medical problems that arise from smoking.
All right.
So they had tried to appeal several times, but now late last year, the Supreme Court passed the Tobacco Control Act.
So then it's been there for about 2-3 years, and it's always been a risk factor that was just lacking somewhere behind the operations.
Yeah.
Okay. So when it was passed last year, what did this mean? Was there like a back tax? Did they have to backdate the levies and pay a massive sum towards this levy?
So that's the thing that no one had anticipated this year. So the law was unclear, first of all, on whether the 2% was to be applied on total gross revenue, or on total net revenue, or on net revenue from domestic sales. So it's very unclear in that aspect. But to be prudent, BAT then went ahead to provide for the worst case scenario. So they provided for 2% of total revenue, and they applied this retrospectively all the way to 2017.
Okay.
So, but they are still in talks with government, and the hope is that the final judgment will be that it is to be applied on net revenue from local sales.
Okay.
Because if it's on gross first, it's tax on tax.
Yes,
because you already have excise.
Yes.
And then the Ministry of Health, who is supposed to be the one collecting these funds, doesn't have jurisdiction outside Kenya, so it doesn't make sense to apply it to exports.
That's true, which are becoming quite material in terms of the total production from the factory.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they did provide for worst case scenario, and that's why they had a big increase in their expenses, and that's why the growth we had seen in their revenues wasn't able to trickle down to profits.
Okay.
So
do you have a sense of what this lump sum figure was, the entire provision?
So it's about 800 million.
800 million.
Annualized. So they did. So you do 800 million for 3 years.
Okay, for 3 years.
That's a very big amount.
That's about 2.4 billion.
Yeah.
So that's 2.4 billion.
Yeah.
And what were their total revenues for this period?
So gross revenue was at 39.6.
Okay.
About
almost 40 billion.
Yeah.
So 2.4 billion is actually a material sum, and it was not expected.
And it was not expected.
Okay.
Or rather, us as analysts had not expected, and since the judgment was passed towards the end of last year.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I feel like if it had come at a different period in time, if it had come, say, this year, then the results would have been completely different.
Yes.
They would have just announced as good a performance as they had at half year.
Because half year the profitability was very strong, and
Yeah.
that was the direction that the market was expecting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So stripping that provision out, they would have done really well.
Okay.
So
maybe just circling back on this, so about 2.4 billion was put aside. That is a number that was not expected. And what are the next steps? Do we expect that BAT will actually go back to the courts? Are they going to try and negotiate with the Ministry of Health? What are the next steps in your perspective and in your interaction with management?
So I think now they're in the process of just putting it clear where that 2% is meant to be applied on. So if it's 2% on local sales,
yes,
local net sales,
okay,
then that should be much better than applying it on overall gross revenue.
Right.
So my feeling is that if they're able to achieve that, then then the provision should reduce.
Okay.
And then that should then the revenue then should be realized in the following year.
Okay.
Which I hope now will trickle down both to profits and perhaps buffer the effect of the 20%.
The 20%. Because if you think about it, this is about 2.4 shillings per share in terms of dividend that could have possibly been paid out.
Yeah.
Because if they paid 35 shillings in the previous year and now they paid 33.5, then what you're effectively saying is this provision is what took away the dividends that could have possibly been paid to the shareholders.
Yes.
Is that a good way to look at it?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how
we would look at it.
Yeah.
So you're saying the next steps is for BAT to negotiate with the Ministry of Health in terms, and I suppose the Attorney General's office to get a proper interpretation of the application of this law.
Yes.
Do you have a sense of what timelines we should be looking out for, or perhaps what trigger points, what information that comes out into the public we should be looking out for to see the impact it could have on BAT?
I think they would announce it, or it would be in the papers if they do decide on a clear manner of calculating it.
Okay.
And then now you should be able to adjust your models both going forward.
Yes.
And adjust for that provision. So the other thing that was unclear was whether it was to be applied retrospectively or going forward.
So that's what also needs to be clear. So whether it's retrospective, whether it applies to both domestic and foreign sales, and whether it applies to gross or to the net revenue.
Yes.
Okay, Cynthia, we'll take a quick break. As we take the break, this is a key takeout from BAT. The numbers, they had to make a provision of 2.4 billion payable to the government of Kenya for the silicium levy. Now, if this was not paid, that would have been about 2.4 shillings in addition to the dividend that you would have gotten. It's a risk factor. It's also an opportunity to look out for to see if there's any decision that's made there. We take a quick break and we will be back looking at the forward-looking estimates for this particular counter. Let's see you shortly.